Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Ellie Goldberg. And for those that don't know me, I've been serving as a scout researcher with 100Kin10 for a couple years actually now, getting to work with many of the amazing project teams and communities here. And I'm also a doctoral student in STEM education at the University of Texas at Austin. And I'm honored to be here and honored to get to just moderate this panel of amazing folks here today. So I'm going to just kind of frame our time together and then get our panelists talking. So this topic of STEM identity, I'm so excited that it's really one of our first kickoff sessions. As I was engaging with the different communities and project teams for the past few months, this topic kept coming up over and over again. So in one of the teams, they were talking about grappling with critical pedagogy really serve to foster STEM identity in students. Another team was thinking about teacher implicit bias and the effect that can have on student STEM identity. And another team was thinking about representation in STEM fields and STEM majors and the role that STEM identity plays in students going into STEM careers and majors. So this kept coming over again and again, and I started getting more and more interested in it. And for those of us that are in the equity in high school STEM community, you might have seen my Mobilize post all about STEM identity. And I got so interested in it that actually for one of my final papers for a class this semester, I wrote it entirely on math identity. Math is my particular piece of the STEM puzzle. I love Talia's puzzle analogy. For me, I'm just thrilled, and I've been really deep in it, as the panelists know, as we've been grappling with this and talking about our panel. There's so much we could say. It's such a complex and nuanced topic. So we're just going to scratch the surface here today. But I also love what Lauren said about together. And so each person here is going to kind of bring their piece of the puzzle, how they think about STEM, why it's important, and really what they're doing in their context and what you can do in your context to think about cultivating STEM identity in our students. So without further ado, I'm going to have our panelists unmute and introduce themselves. And so Xochitl, we'll start with you. If you could share your names, your context, where you're coming from, and your STEM inspiration.
Sure. So my name is Sochi Garcia. I work for Science Friday, which is a public radio program, and we cover science news and research. And we also have an education space where we work with educators to develop resources based on current ideas in science. I am my STEM inspiration. I know I said Oki Lee because she's always my STEM inspiration, but also more recently, like looking at Advait Ucard's research on megafauna and megafauna extinction has also been my STEM inspiration for the week.
Love that. Thanks. Sadie.
Yeah, hello everybody. I'm Sadie Norwick, and I work with the National Math and Science Initiative. We're an organization dedicated to creating lasting change in schools to create greater opportunity for all students. And my current STEM inspiration is all of the young learners in my life. I have my nephew doing remote school here today, and just this morning he was explaining that hoverboards really do exist, but it takes really expensive metal and magnets. So that's my current STEM inspiration.
I love that. I have a nephew remote learning in second grade too, so very inspirational. And last but not least, Gideon.
Hi, Gideon Weinstein. I've been with Western Governors University for 16 years doing teacher education. A dozen years before that doing this and that and the other thing. My inspiration is actually my kindergarten and first grade Montessori school teacher, because we were allowed to study what we wanted to. And if you don't know Montessori, it is incredibly inquiry-based and student-centered. So I think that 5-year-old Gideon's experiences have unlocked capabilities, abilities, and just a life that I probably wouldn't have had quite so easily. Well, it wasn't easy. That I probably wouldn't have had, or I would have had with much more effort if I hadn't been exposed to that kind of teaching and learning early on. It's been an inspiration since then.
I love that. Thanks, Gideon. It's funny. I got a new puppy. I have a pandemic puppy, and I say I'm a Montessori puppy mom because I really just let her explore everything. So that's my Montessori experience. So, okay, well, thanks, panelists, for being here. And we're going to jump right into our first question. So I'm going to share for sake, STEM identity, as we said, is this huge topic, and there really isn't one clear, coalesced definition. But math researcher Jo Boaler, for those of you familiar with her work out of Stanford, shares this definition of identity in some of her research. So she refers to it as a sense of belonging to a group, sense of achievement within the norms of a group, and particular behaviors associated with belonging to a particular group. So as we think about that in the context of STEM, I want to hear from a couple of our panelists on really what that means to them and how they see that definition playing out in STEM context. So Xochitl, if you could kick us off with really what comes to mind when you think about STEM identity and your context, what aspects are most important to you?
I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is like seeing yourself reflected in the space, right? So a sense of STEM identity is like, when we think about our transition to NGSS and kind of what we're doing is we're asking students to shift and teachers to shift from what science is to what science does. And so when I think about STEM identity, I think about that shift and how we're trying to have students like see themselves as investigators, as scientists, as engineers in the class these problems. But the other thing that I think about, especially when thinking about the equity work and kind of what we've been engaging in our conversations, is when we talk about belonging, when we talk about achievement and norms and behaviors, like where are those being defined? And I know a group specifically talked about implicit bias, and they probably discussed this when they were talking about it, is like those are shaped and defined by particular communities, and for a very long time and even currently they're white centered, right? So when we think about STEM identity and when we think about equity and inclusion, we also have to question like what belonging means and who defines it, what achievement means and who defines it, and what those behaviors are that we see within STEM. And that's kind of what's on top of mind when I think about shaping STEM identity or bringing students into feeling comfort in their STEM identity, is that kind of broader idea.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much. Because it's not just right the STEM as we know it, but there's this piece of like, who gets to say what STEM is. And I think, in some of our prep conversations, I think, Sadie, that was something you brought up, is like kind of really broadening what we see as STEM. So can you kind of jump in and share some of your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I grew up with a very narrow definition of what it meant to be a scientist or what it meant to be STEM. It was a doctor or someone in a white lab coat. And so creating this broadened definition of STEM identity and what it means to be in those fields or see people in those fields is such a great thing. It doesn't have to be someone in a white lab coat. It can be an engineer. It can be someone working on a computer. It can be someone doing coding. It can be someone working on a robot. It could be someone in deep space or the bottoms of our oceans. It can be such a broad field, and there are so many opportunities. So we do really need to take a look at broadening that STEM identity, that representation, who we see in those fields, and modeling that for our students.
Yeah, I love that. And, as I mentioned at the beginning, there's so many different aspects, right, to what we, how we conceptualize STEM identity. But I think really we want to sort of get into the meat of like, so why is it important though? So why focus on STEM identity? And we kind of touched on it a little bit, but I think, Sadie, you're bringing sort of that elementary perspective. So can you kick us off with this question and just talk to us a little bit about why you think it's important to cultivate STEM identity for all students of all ages?
Yeah, absolutely. I do a lot of work with early elementary educators, students, and in that space. And if you look at the research, like the most recent National Assessment for Educational Progress, 82% of fourth graders report that they engage in hands-on science inquiry less than twice a month. And that includes the students that never do it. So they go a whole school year without science. And it's a huge problem, but it's really multifaceted. I know Gideon will touch on this later more in depth, but our teachers, our early elementary teachers, man, they are miracle workers and Jacks and Jills of all trades. But it's really hard for some of them to do STEM and to do science. And there's a lack of teacher preparation in a lot of cases. They're going through their own schooling or their own PD and not being exposed to STEM content or pedagogy. There can be a lack of administrator support. A lot of science isn't tested until third or fourth grade. So it's just not a priority for teachers or schools to be implementing that with young learners. And that's really such a huge problem, because the great thing about young learners is that STEM is how they operate. They are naturally curious. They're naturally asking questions. They tinker, they play, and that's doing STEM, that's doing science. And so we have such a huge opportunity to take advantage of that with our young learners foster it, build on it, and just create a STEM identity from the very beginning that only grows and grows.
Yeah, I segued right into what we were going to ask Gideon to kind of talk about next, is that teacher piece, right? And I know Gideon is really passionate about teacher education, teacher training. And so along with this why, the why is it important to cultivate STEM identity? Gideon, can you kind of share your perspective on why think about it in terms of teachers? Why do teachers also need a STEM identity?
Well, of course, it stems from my experience as a 5-year-old, right? I had teachers who got me to explore, to take on the mantle of a scientist doing experiments, to take on the mantle of a mathematician exploring patterns, to think about the engineering and technology areas as maybe the scientific method, but iterative to create things that fit with the world and humanity. So that kind of experience is actually a lot easier to foster in kids because of their natural curiosity than the kind of curriculum that our elementary school teachers get in mathematics and science and engineering and coding, right? They don't get that kind of thing. They aren't asked to take on the mantle of explorers themselves. And actually, it's a lot more exciting and interesting to be an explorer than to be a memorizer or a symbol pusher, right? That's the main flaw in mathematics, memorization and symbol pushing instead of what is the underlying pattern here, what math is called the science of patterns. For secondary education, we have to learn to blend, but we also need, because of national requirements, a major in the field. So we have to learn how to adapt some of that learning in the major into this inquiry-based, exploration-based, critical theory-based activity, not just pushing really hard symbols around or doing really big experiments, but instead a deeper exploratory attitude, more specialized in their particular field, but yet growing from what the STEM educators learn. It's a puzzle,
Yeah.
and there's politics, but it's a different, and I hope a better way to think about the content areas.
Yeah, and it's so interesting. I was actually a math major in undergrad when it was completely different than what I was doing when I started learning how to become an inquiry-based teacher in K-12 mathematics. I can definitely relate to that. And interesting that you brought up this idea of, kind of a STEM major in college, because actually kind of to that piece of why is STEM identity important. There a study came out not too long ago about STEM persistence in majors, and Black and Latinx students in STEM is the only major, or STEM majors are the only majors where it is STEM, Black and, I'm going to butcher the statistic, Black and Latinx students are significantly more likely than their white peers to switch out of a STEM major. And so as we think about this idea of getting students excited about STEM at a young age, what it looks like to do that kind of inquiry-based exploring, it does have those impacts down the line for careers and for majors. And so we kind of talked about that, but then I think, Sochi made this great point of there's sort of this bigger why, this more kind of, societal piece of like, how are STEM fields actually going to be changed by having more representation, and kind of what is the long-term impact, and what are kind of the consequences if we don't have that?
I mean, from the news perspective, we see a lot of this, right? We see communities of color with like distrust in the medical system because there are racist practices that are engaged there. We see like sensor systems that are made that don't recognize darker skin. We see so we have all of this research being done, and if it's done from a white perspective and a white lens, then as it trickles down or as it makes its way out into the world, it isn't being designed inclusive of communities of color. There's no equity by design. And that's just like in the medical and engineering field. And when we talk about you kind of brought up this point of like where the knowledge comes from and who is a scientist and who has a STEM identity. And when we think about who holds knowledge and where we value that knowledge, we kind of have to start thinking like outside of the Western perspective, right? Like, who are the holders of knowledge in different communities, and like, where do we position them? And so like, there's a lot of implications. And I know like, Ellie, you kind of shared the paper from Northwestern that I was reviewing as we go through this panel. And it's even in the hypotheses that we make about why particular things are happening or the observations, those are colored by our cultural context. And so when we have diversity within that field, and when we have a diversity of people contributing, we have a fuller analysis of those ideas and those observations, because science isn't, isn't in an ivory tower, not impacted by society. Like, we know this, like, it is directly impacted by our context and where we're coming from. So if we think about like where diversity and increased STEM identity, especially for students of color, especially for Black and Latine students, like, it really is about like them seeing themselves, but also them seeing their cultural context being valued in that space, and the things they bring into the classroom being valued in that space. And so it gets to this point where it's not just the content you cover, it's historical context that you cover. It's also like acknowledging harms of certain fields that you're covering in class. And then the pedagogy, the structures that you use. Are they positioning students to like hold their power, or are they positioning students to be vessels? And that plays a lot into where they view themselves as scientists, as engineers, as mathematicians. And so that's kind of what I think about a lot, and includes teachers as well. Like, they are STEM professionals, but a lot of times when we refer to STEM professionals, we do not include teachers. And they know a lot, and they are experts at what they do. And so positioning that expertise in different places within society becomes more important.
Absolutely. And that was actually one of my most recent mobilized posts, is a STEM career also. And so, I'm sure Gideon's excited about that, but we just have a few minutes left. So I want to kind of transition us into taking a couple minutes each to, we kept mentioning context, and it's great that each of you is coming from a very different context. And so is everyone who's here today. We know that the 100K network spans so many different locations, organizations, and people. I'm glad you mentioned it's not just teachers, it's folks working in nonprofits, working in industry. So maybe we'll start with Xochitl again. And if you could share kind of a little bit about your context at Science Friday and how you see your role really supporting STEM identity and what you're doing.
So, I mean, we cover science news, but when we're doing outreach to the public and when we're doing sort of this curiosity education arm to the public, we're kind of trying to have them rethink what science is actually, and think about this idea of, the way you learned science in school is not necessarily the right way. And the way we value PhDs or particular types of knowledge is not necessarily valuing those things. Like, there's a place for all of that work, but these are things that contribute to an inaccessible and inequitable system in STEM, and contribute to siloing STEM identity and centering it on whiteness and structures that center on socioeconomic status as well, right? Like, and so I think a lot of the work that we're doing at Science Friday is to feature more voices in a variety of contexts. So community voices and their contributions to data and what we know about different things, but then also to work with teachers about curiosity. So a lot of our professional development this year is not super pedagogy focused. It's like, let's talk with this scientist about this cool phenomena, and like, let's dive in and get curious to reignite some of that passion for science. Because I think we say, teach this unit, teach these standards, and we lose a bit of the joy that Gideon was talking about in that exploratory nature. And so just trying to ignite curiosity in people and their questions is kind of what we're doing at Science Friday.
Yeah, I love that. Reaching the general public. And then Gideon, of course, you have the teacher and teacher educator perspective. So how do you see that context really working towards cultivating STEM identity?
I'd really like to pick up on Xochitl's comment about curiosity, right? And I also want to remind you of Paulo Freire's pedagogy of the oppressed, and the deep need for all of us to look at the world critically. And I think what a teacher can do, knowing more STEM content than those that they are helping teach and learn, they can show those students, whatever level, that curiosity is universally human. It does not belong to any particular socioeconomic status or skin color. right? That can be emphasized. And then the critical nature, I believe STEM is a particularly powerful tool to influence, because you've got powers of analysis beyond the norm. So I think those powers, teachers should focus on giving their students those powers, not only to think about how STEM might have been used to reproduce inequities, as Sochi's spoken of, but how you can, acknowledge those inequities, analyze those inequities, and perhaps fight those inequities with those STEM tools, as well as the usual social, political, sociological tools. So I think that's what we need in teacher education is, in STEM teacher education, we need our teachers to think about what they do as critical STEM pedagogy. That's a
Yeah.
shift, right? That's a deep shift, but not such a big shift, particularly for elementary school teachers who know that there is huge curiosity in their kids. And I think some of them know that they're kind of being forced by standards to squelch some of it. So, that's another political battle to be fought, but I think society is learning that standards don't create quality. Quality teachers create quality. But we'll leave that for another panel on another day.
Another
Thanks.
panel for another day, yeah. But thanks, Gideon. And Sadie, just to wrap us up, we kind of talked about the public's role, teacher role, and then what about, your unique role in terms of external partnerships? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I do a lot of work with partnerships and STEM ecosystems and out of school time learning. And I think Lauren said it great in our opening. Each of us know a little, but together we know a lot. And so when we talk about STEM identity, we talk about supporting teachers and students. None of us are alone. And no matter where we're coming from, where we're tuning in from, if you're in a school, if you're in a educational institution, a nonprofit, we all have communities that we're coming from. And there are STEM communities, STEM ecosystems, museums, science centers, industries that we can all work together to solve issues, to support students, to support teachers, to build our STEM identities. So just like we're here as a community of 100K10. So I just really want to emphasize that, like Lauren said, together we can do a lot.
Yeah, that was beautiful, Sadie. And that could have said it better to sum up our panel today. As we wrap up, I just want to thank each of you, Xochitl, Sadie, and Gideon, for again taking the time to prepare and your thoughtful contributions. And thanks everyone for participating. We hope just maybe inspire you a little bit, and that you have this now taking into as you carry out through the rest of the afternoon and your breakout sessions and then the panel later this afternoon, that you'll be kind of thinking about this idea of STEM identity in the back of your mind. And so thanks everyone again for being here. And I'm going to turn it back over to Lauren, who will give some next steps for the rest of the afternoon.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much. That was awesome. Obviously, we could hear about that for a lot longer. I hate to cut you off early, but got a lot packed into this day today. So thank you so much. That was amazing. I'm sure other people are clapping, but we can't hear them. Okay, so I'm sure everybody is itching to get into conversation with each other. So I want to tell you a little bit about what is going to happen next and how it all works. So over the next 30 minutes, you'll be able to join one of 4 breakout sessions, and you can choose to attend a session that's hosted by one of our communities and contribute to their work, or a session that's hosted by 100K10 and learn a bit about our latest Catalyst research. The breakout sessions are not going to be recorded, so you can feel free to explore, ask questions, be vulnerable with one another. It'll just be all you guys in there. If you'd rather do something a bit different and explore at your own pace, you can instead choose to go to that expo that I mentioned earlier and check out the different booths that are in there. There's tools and report updates and other resources, lots to dig into. And if you're interested in getting in touch or learning more about anything that you see in that expo, you can just click the little Get in Touch button that's in each of those booths. You can also choose to keep doing the one-on-one networking in the networking space, but I'll just give a little reminder that each of these breakouts is only happening once, and the networking and expo are available anytime. So if you were hoping to attend a particular breakout that's happening during the session, don't accidentally miss your chance and do one of those other things instead. Go to the breakout you wanted to go to. Okay, so in a moment, you can go ahead and move into the breakout sessions by just clicking on that breakout sessions icon on the sidebar on the left. And when you enter that area, you'll see the 4 different breakout sessions that are available during this particular session. And there's also some tags at the top that you can use to filter by catalyst if that helps narrow down your decision for you. And once you've chosen the session that you want to join, you can just click on it and you'll enter the room. And there's no need to turn on your video or audio until you're invited to do so. And you'll know when that time has come. So I will let you all go and explore that now. I'll be back here at 3:10 Eastern, and I hope I'll see all of you back in this room. I hope you have fun in the breakout sessions.